Good evening. If I can get your attention, I apologize for starting a few minutes late. It's a combination of the Vista operating system and a few other software entities that we cannot necessarily make happen on cue. I'm very happy that you're all here, and very happy that we have the panel that we've been able to get, with Martha Dennis moderating, Marty Cooper, and Arlene Harris. It's indeed an honor to have them here, and pretty shortly I will invite them up here. But before I do that, I want to mention several of you are not TiE members. If this is your first time, I hope you will come back, become a member, and certainly participate in our future events. Besides today's excellent topic, we have next month a topic on entrepreneurship in the gourmet food business, which is as far away from the tech origins of TiE as you could possibly get. Last month, I knew there were some in the audience who were closet entrepreneurs who wanted to, gourmet food is something that I guess it's of everybody's interest. We have in November, in our monthly event, I believe November 12th or 13th, not our typical week, we're going to Cal IT 2 at UCSD. Rather than having an event here, we will go to Cal IT 2, and a little unusual, we will have a demonstration and a series of presentations moderated by Ramesh Rao, Professor Ramesh Rao of Cal IT 2. He is director there. And I'm really looking forward to it because from an entrepreneurship point of view, UCSD's Cal IT 2 generates more ideas than I've seen anywhere else. And they interconnect disciplines. So I invite you to come back for the November event as well. The one other point, we have among our membership a level of charter membership, an invitation by invitation status, if you will. There are a few charter members here. I saw, I believe, Patrick Berry was here, and Jimmy Tab, Dean Hussain. Okay. We have several members of the executive committee here as well who helped to organize. And maybe Preeti, if Preeti is here, we need to turn on the air conditioning. I know it's a little warm, I see people. Usually it's not this warm. One other thing, you see on your table an announcement of a Nishat Khan concert. There are members here, Jazz Grewal and others who are key organizers of this. If you are interested, please see them after the panel discussion. And Tanya Kapoor from LA is here, and there's an America-India Foundation gala that she wanted us to make an announcement. It's on November 15th. In addition, I must say there are several new people here, but some who have traveled far from northern part of LA. Lloyd, he's with KPBS TV. So we are happy to have him and his friends here. They are entrepreneurs of a serial nature, so please seek them out if you are curious. Without further ado, let me invite Martha Dennis. Martha is a serial entrepreneur, co-founder of PCSI in the past, and also now a principal at the Gordian Knot. Martha, several of you know Martha is, I'm really grateful that you accepted to moderate this. Please come on up. Thank you.
how to get my notes. I'm worthless without them. So there are two turns of phrase that really set me on edge. One is when a waiter at a busy restaurant who wants to speed up my dinner says to me, "And are we still enjoying our food?" And the other is when I read a business plan written by a dozen or so 25-year-olds, and the plan starts with, "Our staff has 80 years of experience in telecommunications." I'm going to start out this introduction of Arlene Harris and Marty Cooper by breaking my rule of good taste and telling you this dynamic duo does have 100 years of experience in wireless. So it's true. So in Monterey, California in 1979, a significant alliance began between the bleeding edge of cellular telephony development and the paging world, which was then pretty state-of-the-art in terms of wireless connectivity. This was embodied in the first encounter between Arlene Harris and Marty Cooper. The development of the relationship between these two founders of the wireless world into a full-fledged recorded marriage took several years, just like the development of the wireless industry. But Arlene and Marty are now celebrating a mature, it's only 17 years, 17-year marriage. And I think you would agree that the wireless world has matured significantly as well. When they first met, it was at a conference which Arlene's family insisted she attend. Arlene had been involved in her family's LA radio mobile business called Metro Call since the tender age of 5, when she started helping operators connect telephone calls on a mobile telephone switchboard. Arlene eventually helped grow Microcall, later called ICS, into the largest paging company in a single area in the world, and sold it to Metro Media in 1983. Part of her family's work in paging was the Life Page system, which provided pagers to people waiting for organ transplants, instead of forcing them or a family member to constantly wait by a wireline phone for a notification that a suitable organ was available. In '83, she teamed up with Marty to found Cellular Business Systems, Inc., which became the largest independent billing company in the emerging cellular industry. CBSI, as it was referred to, was sold to Cincinnati Bell in 1986. At that point, Arlene started Subscriber Computing Incorporated, a California-based billing services software company. SEI built the first cellular switch provisioning and mediation systems that led to the first prepaid communication system in history. SEI was sold to Corsair in 1997 and then became part of Lightbridge. As if that weren't enough, this tireless wireless entrepreneur then founded SOS Wireless Communications to commercialize low-usage, safety-focused cellular phone service. Following along that same goal, Arlene then founded a mobile virtual network operator called Great Call in 2005 and launched the Jitterbug subsidiary in 2006 in partnership with Samsung. The mission was to provide simplicity in the cellular phone experience. The Jitterbug phone is a simple device which offers a few very clear options for its users. The Jitterbug dial looks like a regular phone, but with extra large, well-lit keys on a keyboard. And the One Touch is a simple clamshell device with a total of 6 buttons, so not too many choices. I'm sure you've seen the Jitterbug ad in your Sunday paper, and I happened to save this from my family, and I'm sure you all got it on Sunday. You can find it probably next week as well. The Jitterbug phone and service has earned top honors in Yahoo's last gadget standing competition in 2007, was named to the New York Times 10 Best Brilliant Ideas of 2006, as well as the Reader's Digest Top 100 Products. Under her guidance, Great Call won the wireless industry's coveted Andrew Siebel Choice Award for Best New Company in 2007. So a little bit of success there. Besides serving on several corporate boards and advising many companies over the years, Arlene holds several issued and several pending patents relating to wireless communications. She's also served on several committees of the FCC, the TiE, and PCIA, and created early cellular standards, including the method by which carriers provide roaming services. She's been recognized with many awards and was inducted into the Wireless Hall of Fame in 2007, the first woman ever to be inducted. There she was recognized for her innovation in creating the first automation for managing paging and mobile telephone businesses. And I imagine after plugging all those phones in, you would want it automated. So much of her early work provides a template for the way most wireless businesses are run today. So she really has earned her title of the First Lady of Wireless. So when Marty met Arlene in 1979, he was at Motorola. Hired by Motorola in 1954, I can barely remember that. He had worked on developing portable products, including the first portable handheld police radios made for the Chicago Police Department. He had introduced the first portable cellular radio telephone in 1973 and is the inventor named on the seminal radio telephone systems patent filed in October of that year. He's the first person to make a call on a portable cellular phone ever. And this call occurred on April 3rd, 1973, as they say, to the bewilderment of passersby in a New York City street. They must have thought he was crazy or talking to himself. And that call was placed on a 1 3/4 pound, very lightweight, cordless cell phone, fondly called the Brick. And he made it to his rival, the then head of research at Bell Labs. Maybe he lost his job right after that. I'm curious as to what happened. The event caused a fundamental telephone technology and market shift to a person as a call destination rather than a place. It was the incarnation of his vision for personal wireless communications as distinct from cellular car phones. The Star Trek TV show took credit for inspiring Marty with Captain Kirk's communicator. However, as we were chatting this evening, Marty let on that he invented the cell phone before Captain Kirk was invented. So it doesn't exactly line up. So during his 29-year tenure at Motorola, Marty became corporate director of R&D, and he created a number of major businesses, including cellular systems and devices, a small business for Motorola, and high-capacity paging. In addition to his leadership in technology, he helped guide the strategic and regulatory policy at Motorola that, and I love this, disrupted AT&T's plans to monopolize the emerging cellular industry. Thank you. And in 1983, he co-founded with Arlene Cellular Business Systems, and together they led the company to a dominant position in the cellular billing industry. In '92, he founded Arraycom, of which he is now executive chairman. Arraycom is the world leader in multi-antenna signal processing, otherwise known to the world as smart antenna technology. And obviously, smart antenna technology increases the capacity of cellular networks significantly. And while he continues to work full-time as executive chairman of Arraycom, he also is the co-founder and chairman of Great Call. So lots of family togetherness. Marty serves on the U.S. Department of Commerce Spectrum Advisory Committee, which advises the executive branch and the U.S. president on radio spectrum policy. And he's testified before the FCC and the Senate. He holds 9 patents in the communications field. And just in the way of background, he grew up in Chicago, it's a good town, and received his degree in EE from Illinois Institute of Technology and a master's degree also from IIT. He is the recipient of a gazillion awards, and in 2000 he too was inducted into the Wireless Hall of Fame. So Cooper's law is the term used for Marty's observation that the number of wireless conversations which can be conducted concurrently in any given geographic area has doubled every 2.5 years over the last 100 years. So, Marty, if someone's phone rings tonight during this program, as the father of portable cellular technology, you can only blame yourself. So next we'll hear from Arlene and Marty directly, and following that I'll ask them some questions and hopefully put them on the spot. And then after that you'll get a crack at trying to stump them. So.
That was a good technology set to turn this on.
Thank you. Only Martha Dennis could take an introduction and turn it into a major address.
So much to say about it.
But thank you. I have been severely criticized by my wife, who is the only critic that I care about the fact that those of you that heard me know that I never ever give commercials. I like to talk about technology, philosophy, but I'll let other people do the marketing, and Arlene says that's not the way the business works. There's not a person here that hasn't heard the Jitterbug commercial. And everybody knows what that sounds with, and most of you can actually dance the Jitterbug commercial. So I take this opportunity now, if you'll forgive me, to do my commercial. And we have that on a computer, and if you'll bear with me for 3 minutes, and I promise not to say anything beyond that about Arraycom.
People are fundamentally mobile. They don't want to be leashed to a desk. They They don't want to be tied to their homes. They don't want to be stuck in their cars without being able to communicate all the time. We proved that 30 years ago with voice when we invented the concept of cellular telephone. And now we're about to do it again with the internet. There are 1.5 billion people using cellular telephones, almost all for speech today throughout the world. When the power of the internet is available to people with broadband and at low cost, the number of applications will be countless. Things that we haven't even conceived of before will be possible if in fact we can provide broadband internet at low cost and make it ubiquitous. Raycom was created about 14 years ago with one single mission. That is to provide software that takes the radio spectrum and makes the use of the radio spectrum much, much more effective. At the time, Marconi demonstrated the first transatlantic radio conversation. He used all of the available radio spectrum, and it was possible maybe to have one more conversation like that in the world. If you do the math, we have in fact doubled the ability to use this radio spectrum every 2.5 years for the last 100 years. To today, we have improved the ability to use this radio spectrum by 10 to the 12th. That's 1 trillion times. And not only that, we are going to keep doing it. The techniques that Raycom has developed over the years, which are called adaptive array processing, they're called smart antennas, and a whole bunch of other technical names, all are based upon software combined with an array of antennas at every base station and possibly even in the terminal units in the computers and handsets. And that software allows us to have many, many more people use the radio spectrum and at much lower cost and at much higher speeds. Far, far more efficient than ancient 30-year-old cellular technology. And what's the effect of all this for the consumer and for the operator? It means lower operating costs, lower capex, and lower maintenance costs, and more robust communications. For the consumer, this means lower cost, better service. All of that is what smart antenna technology does for people. What an exciting time to live in. 30 years ago, we proved that communications was personal. That when you called a telephone number, you weren't calling a place, you were calling a person. That's a huge and profound change in how we lived. That's about to happen again.
Forget about the Intel part. Actually, Intel just produced that short thing as a favor to me, and the only thing they got out of it is the Intel logo at the end. I'm going to say just a few words. I'm going to start because once Arlene gets going, I may not have another opportunity. That event that Martha talked about the first portable cellular telephone call was probably the biggest mistake I ever made, because there are a few other things that I did in my life, but that's the only thing that people ever want to talk about. So I'm not going to talk about tonight, although I'll talk about anything you ask questions about, especially if you happen to ask me about smart antennas, which, as Martha pointed out, are fundamentally the only way the next generation systems are going to meet their economic goals. And economics is what it's all about. So I thought I'd just mention a couple of the principles that were important to me in the various things that I've done over the years. And they did include radio paging. We at Motorola conceived of the first high-capacity radio pagers. That used to be a really big business for those of you that have gray hair and still remember about radio paging. We introduced the first trunked systems into the land mobile industry, which were another form of spectral efficiency. And the bottom line is, I have spent most of my career in one really narrow area. I mean, talk about a narrow guy, like just wireless and really spectral efficiency. And the reason that we did this, and we didn't mention this on in the concept of this law of spectral efficiency, is because the land mobile industry has always been starved. The government has never assigned enough radio spectrum so that we could perform the most important services that society needs. I mean, the police, fire, emergencies, ambulances, all of these kinds of services, in addition to all the productivity improving things. So we have been under constant pressure in the land mobile industry to squeeze the spectrum down, to extract more and more value out of the radio spectrum. So what are some of these principles? Well, I was an engineer. I'm kind of yesterday's engineer, but I still try to keep up. And there are some dangers in being an engineer. What's the biggest danger? Creating technology for the sake of technology. That is absolutely the worst thing that an engineer can ever do. If you lose sight of what the technology is all about, what's the definition of technology? It's the application of science to produce products that make people's lives better. And the only really important thing about that definition is the people part. You can't forget about the people. So that's one principle. Not technology, but what technology does for people. The second principle that is crucial is understanding your customer's problems better than your customer does. There is a myth that goes around in the marketing industry, and maybe for some industries it may be valid, that what you're trying to do is satisfy the customer. Well, the customer doesn't always, in fact, the customer rarely knows what he or she wants. You really have to put yourself into the mind, into the habits, into a true understanding of what the customer is, and anticipate what the customer is going to need in the future. Everybody here knows how long it takes to make a product. Take a look at what happened with the cellular. And we conceived of the cellular portable in 1973. In 1983, we had the first commercial application. 10 years later, and guess what most of the cell phones were in 1983? They were almost all car telephones. You would have thought that AT&T had gotten their way. But within 5 years, half the phones were portables, and today it's not even possible to buy a car telephone. It takes a long time to create technology, and the bottom line is we used to have a rule of order. We had three kinds of programs. We have the standard program to create a product. This is taking, you have a prototype now, you want to deliver a product. The standard time period for delivering that product was 2 years. And then we had the rush program, and that was 18 months. And then we had the crash program. That was 1 year. They all took 2 years, but we had 3 names for these. So at best, you have to anticipate what the customer is going to need by at least several years, and that's the worst thing that consumers do, is predict what they are going to need in the future. It's up to the engineers, the entrepreneurs, the people who make the investment, the people who have the ideas that come up with these things. So I just thought I'd throw these two fundamental principles out for starters, and I'm going to turn the rostrum over to Arlene, who will say some much more intelligent things than I did.
Thank you, Marty. Thought you were going to make some more jokes about how long I was going to talk. A lot of people are very interested in the genesis of Jitterbug, so I think maybe to start I'll talk a little bit about that. Jitterbug was actually the culmination of almost my entire career in wireless, going back to the time when I was actually plugging phone calls in for customers in Los Angeles on the mobile telephone switchboard. And the analog to that today is that Jitterbug has 24/7 operators that can answer the phone when you push the O button and make phone calls for you if you're not able to dial yourself or need some help. So after 50 years, it's coming full circle back to very well-assisted telephone service for those who haven't been able to adopt cellular service. So the genesis of Jitterbug really goes back to the mid-90s, when a group of fellas out of Apple and some other colleagues of mine separately were starting to work on an analog solution cell phone for people who just wanted communications for safety. And this was before the digital phones had become very predominant. And to get, after a lot of investment and a lot of the entrepreneurial woes of investing cycles and so forth, it turns out that we ended up owning the combined groups of these two companies. And one of the groups was out of Apple, and so they had very good Apple background on simplicity and concepts that had to do with, getting into the minds of the consumer, like Marty had talked about. And we, over the next 4 years, had every possible, right, I think there's every possible problem, every roadblock, every pothole, every brick wall that you could imagine being thrown up in front of us to keep that business alive. And finally, after we'd acquired 25,000 customers, the final blow came when our chipset provider stopped building our chipsets, and it was just impossible to keep going. In the meantime, there was a meltdown in the wireless industry, so we kept these 25,000 customers going, but we didn't have any way to grow. The business cycles recovered in the early, say the 2003 timeframe, and by 2004 I had some ideas about how to cause the new issue in wireless to be solved. And so what had happened in the interim between the early to mid-90s, when most consumers of wireless service were enterprise customers, and we started this safety business for their parents in effect. So they had safety phones when they were in their cars. By the time the early part of this century started, the cellular phone service had become consumerized. So now, the guy that works at the gas station had a cell phone, and the lady that served you lunch had a cell phone. Everybody had a cell phone. The problem is that right at that time, cell phone technology was being miniaturized, and more computing power and more features and all digital, etc. And so what had happened is, in that interim, the cell phone industry had moved beyond the ability of a whole bunch of people to actually adopt cellular telephone service as portables. So you had kids adopting, and you had just about everybody else adopting, but for those of us that were, and our parents that were already beyond the point where they could even bother to learn or even see these things, there was nothing left for them. The very first flip phone that was made by Motorola was very chunky. That would have worked, but it was gone. It was gone in favor of smaller, lighter, faster. You know the drill, right? Smaller, lighter, faster, cheaper, whatever. And it just passed them by. So the genesis of SOS was in the 90s was safety. And by the time we got to 2004, it was not only safety, but it had to do with the convenience of keeping in touch with family who all now had cell phones. So that's the void that we tried to fill. And the whole idea when we started Jitterbug was to try to, the greatest extent possible, adopt the cellular technology and adopt the benefits of cellular technology, but try to lay over it a familiar user experience that had to do with using a home phone. So we didn't actually put dials in or anything like that, but we we made this phone try to behave like what they were used to using, our parents and folks that wanted simplicity, what they were used to, and that was what they do at home. So that started the whole idea. Make it simple, make it comfortable, make it familiar, make it affordable, do something with the rate plans, because these customers don't necessarily use a lot of minutes, but they were having to pay $40 a month to Verizon and AT&T, and that just didn't work for a lot of families. And our people that we serve want to be independent. They're not necessarily the family plan types. So we really had a whole, besides the phone, which is what most people focus on, we had an entire proposition to build. From the rates and the way we present the rates, to the way our operators answer, to trying to remove all of the tech jargon and simplify the user manuals and give operator services and all of that package to make an experience for customers so that they can adopt. And today, about half of our customers had when they got their Jitterbug phone, they had never had a cellular phone before. So it's really gone out to the very last market to engage them and to keep them safe and to set us up for doing a lot of good new things in the future. So that's good start.
Great start.
Is that functional? Yeah, it is. Since we're talking about principles, I ought to add another principle that Arlene really just said, but that I could encapsulate, and that is good technology is invisible technology. Because if you examine what makes Jitterbug work, it's extraordinarily complex. Not only is the phone, I mean, it has the same chip that all the other phones does, except you can use it intuitively. And there's a huge amount of technology in the back offices that support that system, that allow Jitterbug to serve people all over the United States and Canada, give them all local numbers, have them all access operators. It makes it easy for the consumer, but a huge engineering challenge. And that's the way all our products ought to be. And let me tell you, we had a long way to go. As we demonstrated yesterday when I bought Arlene a new BlackBerry, and discovered that the instruction manual for BlackBerry, no kidding, 267 pages.
It should be intuitive. So let's move from frustrated customers to frustrated inventors. I want you to get down and dirty, and I'd like you to each answer these questions separately. I want to ask you, what were your most frustrating experiences, and you can talk about the government if you want, that you encountered as you have developed these various new techniques of communicating for the general public? What are the brick walls you hit? How did you deal with them? You can tell the truth.
So the biggest, let's see, what is probably has been the most troublesome? I would say M&A activities. And when I'm talking about M&A, I'm not talking about being acquired. I'm talking about vendors and partners being acquired. That in almost every business that I've been in, and particularly in the SOS case, key vendors being purchased and changing their strategy or not having any tribal knowledge or tribal loyalty surviving is a string that runs through almost my entire career. So just to give you an idea about that, and in the SOS case, so this is a scenario. So the guys that ran this company for Apple, or that came from Apple that started the business, they ran out of ability to get funded because the carriers wouldn't let them on the network. That sound familiar? They wouldn't let you on with a viable way. So the next thing, after we bought them and we had figured out how to get on, Jay knows some of these people that helped us. The next thing that happened is US West gave us access to their network, and then US West, the CEO, who happened to be a friend, gave us access. They ended up getting merged into what ultimately became AirTouch, Phoenix system. Well, that management had no idea what to do with us. We had, 10,000, 15,000 customers, and they wanted to get rid of us. And we just suggested that maybe that wouldn't be a good idea because most of these were little old ladies and older men, and they needed these phones, and it just wouldn't look good if they did that. And so we kept them at bay for about 4 years, throwing us off their network. The next thing that happened is that we went into a next generation handset from the Apple guys, and the company that was doing this got acquired by Rockwell. Well, the Rockwell guys decided they didn't want to be in that business, so they shut us off, so we no longer had a manufacturer. So we head on out to Singapore. The original guys were Hughes. You might remember Hughes Manufacturing. So then we went to Singapore and we got another manufacturer, and we got it all into production, and we started cranking out phones. That took us almost a year to recover from that. And IBM buys our chipset supplier. And guess what? They cancel our chipset. And that was just like the last blow. So that's just one like 2-year period that I tried to run SOS business and make a go of it, when M&A just killed us in every single key supplier. So the story there is that, relationship, and it gets into the contracts that you sign, and you think, oh yeah, I'm signing this contract, and I've got my friends over there, they're here today, they're gone tomorrow, and here you are without, a relationship, and you just start over, or you get thrown out, and it kills your business. So that's probably my most vivid, horror stories that come from that.
That's a killer, and that's when you realize lawyers really don't protect you. Some lawyers.
Well, you don't get to hang around for the 55 or 60 years that I've been in the business without being a real optimist. And us optimists don't have too many frustrations because, there are a lot of things get in the way and a lot of failures, but you learn from everything, and each time you learn a lesson, you go on to the next thing. So I've been fighting the bean counters, the financial people, excuse me, and the planners, and the regulators, and each time I go through an experience and I have a problem where I get held up, I learn something, and hopefully we get over it. And I want to give you just one example of one of my failures, and I really mean a disastrous failure. You're all familiar with what a quartz crystal resonator is? Every computer has got one in it, but you never hear anybody talk about them anymore. Every cell phone has got a quartz crystal resonator in it, and it's this that establishes the fundamental frequency of this device. And of course, I've been in the communications business, as Martha pointed out very carefully. And if you didn't get the message, by the way, of our 100 years, most of them are mine. I could take credit for that. And Arlene started a lot earlier than I did. So making quartz crystals was really a crucial thing, and I did take over that business at Motorola in my early years because we had some big problems, and revamped that business and made us the best quartz crystal manufacturer in the world. And it occurred to me, because I always wanted to expand and do different things, that these crystals could be used for more than just making communications equipment work. on frequency, and they could be used to stabilize wristwatches. So I started making wristwatch crystals. And for several years, Motorola was the largest manufacturer of quartz crystal resonators for wristwatches in the world. Not only that, it was a very profitable business, and I have to tell you that that's not one of my great skills, is making a lot of money. In fact, whenever I would come up with a great idea and we'd create a business, they would take the business away from me and give it to somebody who would listen to the bean counters and let me work on the really interesting stuff. And then I made a mistake, and one that I will never, ever, ever forget. We were making so much money on these crystals, we forgot to look at the competition, and we created an umbrella. We were selling these little quartz crystals for $2. Well, you can buy a wristwatch today, as you know, for $2. And meanwhile, some guys in Japan were busy automating the processes, and the next thing you know, they're undercutting us at $1.50 and $1. And within a year, they had cut the price down to 33 cents, and within 2 years, we were out of the quartz crystal business. At which time, I learned and became an expert. Anybody wants to talk about that? We've never covered that in our TiE sessions, on the experience curve. The fact is, I discovered that almost everything in the world follows the experience curve. And that's where the law of spectral efficiency comes from. That's where the price experience curve comes, if you're all familiar with that. These are all really important planning tools that every engineer should be very, very familiar with. So I look upon this failure as another great learning experience.
That's terrific. I think that every new company in their business plan ought to have a slide on how they're going to negotiate the experience curve. But I've never seen one. Let me switch to a happier note, and that is innovation and how your innovations were inspired. Don't give me the Star Trek story, which you tell me isn't the truth. But what made you focus? What gave you the idea that communication should be personal, that should be rather than place oriented?
Well, I wish I could take credit for that, but I had mentors. In fact, I've had mentors all my life. You're all familiar with Newton's comment, the reason that I see farther is because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I've had some fantastic giants in my career, and the guy that really got me into an understanding of what I start almost every speech that I give. I didn't do it tonight because you guys have all heard me before. And what's the first thing I say? People are mobile. They're fundamentally, unalterably, naturally mobile. And the idea of having somebody tied to their desk, leashed to their home, trapped in their car is totally unnatural. And that concept was taught to me by a guy named John Mitchell at Motorola, who was my boss and mentor for some 20 years ago. And John and I and several other of our colleagues were making portable devices before it was ever really practical to have portable devices. And we built, and I'm going to just tell you one anecdote about what proved to us that portable was the right way to go. We conceived of an idea of a pager. Imagine being able to remotely beep somebody selectively in a building. And of course, the people you would most benefit from this are doctors, because doctors are trapped. So we conceived of a product we called the low-frequency pager. And this worked with an inductive loop that you put around a building, and the natural buildings were hospitals. And we put this system in Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. If you want to know, one of our standard jokes was the pager themselves. Nobody even built small devices like cell phones. And we found a guy who made the core, paper core for toilet paper rolls. And it turns out he did a superb job of making the housings for these first pager devices. And we produced this pager and equipped all the doctors in Mount Sinai Hospital, and it turns out it was a disaster. I mean, you know, we were trying to cram thousands of parts, little subminiature parts into this toilet paper roll. This is before we had really learned about Six Sigma and a whole bunch of other things. And the things were not really very reliable. And the doctors were complaining. Everybody here knows how doctors are prima donnas. We had a case of a doctor take his patient and throw it against the wall. And we were a reputable company. We came back and said, look, we made a mistake. We gave you this product prematurely. We'll take it back and re-engineer it. And sometime later, when we got it right, we'll bring it back. Absolutely not. That hospital could no longer function without paging, even though this paging system was far from being really practical. If there wasn't a message there, and that message I have gotten over and over again, because you try to take somebody's cell phone away from them anywhere in the world, and it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 days of using a cell phone before it becomes an integral part of your life, and you can't give it up. That's the way you know that you're right about something.
Yeah, now when I go to the doctor, he takes out his little smartphone and he says, let's see, sore throat, check. Fingers tingling, check. Da-da-da. Yes, you have stubbed your toe. Anyway, Arlene, you have a thread of really helping people in their neediest moments in the way you've applied technology. Where did that come from?
Well, I grew up in a family business, and it turns out that my dad was the ultimate problem solver, and we learned to sort of take after him, and it turns out that I never really understood that I was even an inventor until I met Marty, because, you know, we were solving problems in our company every day, and a lot of the problems that we solved and the way we solved them were actually inventions that were going on for years before cellular in the wireless business. But it's actually the notion of you know, so needs of folks. So I'll just focus on one thing. We started a Life Page program 1982 time frame. Well, why was that relevant then? Well, it turns out that in 1981 we were experiencing for the first time the ability of the medical people to be able to make transplants. If you think back, transplantation has only been done since the 70s. And what was very apparent, and most of our customers were industrial, commercial customers. You did not have consumer customers in the paging business. But in this particular case, there was a circumstance that was so clearly solved or helped by having a paging service to these folks that were now on transplant lists. Back then, there were very few people on the transplant list. And if you were on the transplant list, you had to stay near a phone. There was absolutely no alternative, because if that call came, you had to get that call. So otherwise, within a matter of minutes, they would move on to the next recipient if you didn't answer. So this paging service gave those folks who were already in a desperate situation, and these are consumers, not doctors, gave them the opportunity to get their an organ transplant. And back then, I think the original patient was a 13-year-old young man who unfortunately ended up not getting his transplant and passing away, but it started. And then we moved that to the National Association. It became a national program. And by the end of its program, when cellular really took over, literally hundreds of thousands of transplant recipients had received pagers to keep them in touch for their call. But I think it's really the notion that when you see these opportunities that are both that give back and actually highlight the advantages of a technology in a very unique way, that it gives it's giving back, but it's also highlighting what can be done with technology. So, for example, today, in a transplant situation where you completely, where you transplant from someone who's passed away recently, there's as many as about 150 people that are called to make those transplants work. And there's no other way to make their lives work unless they have cell phones and pagers. So that's just one example of one of the things that we did.
Well, it's lucky for us that your family had this bent. And
Martha, if I may. I have known Arlene and Marty for a long time, and known Arlene's family. Arlene is being very humble. I know the Life Page program and what a magnificent job the Life Page program has done for the public. And Arlene has been the driver of the program for years.
thank you for mentioning that. Okay, why don't we get personal and talk about your lives together? And I'll ask you, what are the pluses and minuses of sharing your personal life with somebody as equally as talented as you, equally as creative, and in the same business, general business? Can you give us a few tips on how to make it work and what to watch out for?
Well, I'm going to, first of all, let me disabuse you of one thing you just said. Arlene is much, much smarter than I am and much more creative, so don't put us in the same basket. And as far as how we worked it out, wait a second, we're just in the process. We've been only at it for 30 years now. We're still working on it. But Arlene and I, believe it or not, we start out, and we really are both kind of creative. Arlene has a fundamental feeling that anything that's broken, she's got to go fix it. And she also has a feeling for people, and that's what made the comments that Jay just observed so true. But she applies that energy that she's got to all these things. My creativity tends to be a little more ephemeral and maybe a little far-reaching. So if I come up with an idea, Arlene says, yeah, but what are the details? And I said, well, we'll work those out later. I mean, other people work on the details. I work on the big picture. And so this is a constant battle between Arlene and me, different perspectives. But battles are not all that bad, because whenever you have a battle, you have to have a healing afterwards. And we have the most wonderful healings.
I won't ask you any more details.
All I was referring to is kiss and make up, no? Oh, now I know what kind of minds the people in this audience have.
You get a crack at it.
I can't resist. It was really true what I said when Marty picked me up in a bar in Monterey with my whole family surrounding us. I had no idea what kind of life was ahead. This was way before cellular started, and I was just this young thing from South Central LA, and this guy flies in on his corporate jet, and I think, well, he's probably pretty smart, so I glommed onto him. But he taught me, how important when you have ideas, how important it is to act on them. And so he's been suffering that all these years because I have an idea a minute. And then I vet him out on him. And he's just, you know, the hide has gotten so thick with ideas. It just so happens that every once in a while we happen to glom onto one that we agree to work on together. And it's a good thing because otherwise I don't think we would have made it this far.
Yeah, well, those of you that are more observant notice that the minute Arlene said, "I've got an idea," every muscle in my body tightened up. But she does have wonderful ideas, and she's a superb executor.
Oh, you're an inspiration. I got to go home and tell my husband about you guys. So, in terms of, you've built a lot of businesses. You've been very successful. As I ticked off the numbers of businesses you've sold, I got more and more impressed all over again. Can you tell us what the hardest part of starting a business around an idea has been? And also on the other side, what have been the most facilitating things in your environments that have enabled your businesses?
The hardest part is financing, financing, and financing. That's been just the worst. Because there's some notion that the venture capital community is into taking risks and going into ventures, but it turns out that most of them are just following other people, and have never been able to find the leader in the pack. I should qualify that. In San Diego, there is a very good investor in Great Call called Steel Point Capital. They're not an early stage investor, so we had to be performing before they invested, but they're a very good investor. And if you're in a business today that's already executing and in revenue, I would suggest that you chat with them. They're in Solana Beach. But financing has always been the bane for me. Besides the M&A, the difficulty getting a business into scale. It's always easy to get the ideas started, but getting them to the point where you can execute has been very hard for me.
Well, I have a rule that says there are no easy businesses. On the other hand, I tend to be a little more optimistic than Arlene, and so we could walk into the same situation and perceive them differently. But I had never had any problem getting anything financed. Somehow or other, the real difficulty, my best example is Raycom, which we started in 1992. But think about the difference between the kinds of ideas that Arlene has and the ones that I have. Smart antennas, we're still trying to persuade the world that they cannot build next generation technology without smart antennas. And we know this is true. We've got the numbers. We've built systems. We have spent $300 million proving this concept, developing a technology, building systems. There are systems operating in 22 countries that already do more than WiMAX and LTE, and the world still doesn't believe. So if you want to talk about what is really hard, it is bucking the people that have the muscle. In this case, believe it or not, it's people like Intel. Hello?
Give it to our
Intel, who is controlling the amplifier in this, who have a very short-term perspective, don't have all the experience, don't have the insight, and they've created this thing called WiMAX, and never thinking about what happens when you really fill up the system and it gets to be competitive with the existing cellular systems. What's going to make it better than the existing systems? And believe it or not, if you examine one of the teachings of this spectral efficiency curve, we've used up every other technology except for spatial reuse, which is what smart antennas are. And yet, all the systems that are shipping today as trials in WiMAX don't have smart antennas in them adequately to make them economic. So we know that's going to happen, but you want to talk about a frustration of spending all that money to prove a problem that you know is going to have to be solved. It will most certainly, this technology will most certainly be used within the next few years, but trying to persuade people can really be hard, because who are the troublemakers? The bean counters. They want everything to pay off in the next quarter, and we all know things take longer.
Only if you're public.
Marty, you want to go to the audience for questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask one more, and that is, with all the wisdom you've gained from your many years in cellular, what do you see as the frontiers currently challenging the industry, and what do you think the next significant developments will be in the next, let me say, 10 years? Can you hear me? Did you hear me?
I have that speech prepared. It only takes about an hour or so.
Summarize?
But let me give you I'm really serious. You must know that people ask me that all the time. And we are on the brink of a revolution in wireless. And technology is a very important part of that. And as you might have already guessed, smart antenna technology is the most important part of that. But it's not. Technology is not the name of the game. There are two other issues. The most important one is what we call open access. Does everybody here know what the general principle of open access is? We have lived for the last, actually it's now 110 years, in a monopoly environment it's about 130 years, because it goes way beyond the beginning of wireless, with what we call a walled garden. This has all started out with, basically AT&T. AT&T was in a competitive business.
I knew you were going to say that.
And they ended up winning. And you know how they won? Now, many people know this, but they used to have. See, I'm not just yesterday's engineer. There used to be multiple telephone poles down, and AT&T had better sharpshooters who would shoot their competitors off the telephone poles. Seriously. They ended up winning, and they got control of the regulation. Maybe there was a reason for not having 2 rows of telephone poles, but whatever it is, they have monopoly for like 120 years and created what we call the walled garden. And the essence of the walled garden was exemplified by the process that was the way AT&T was run when I was a young engineer. The Bell Laboratories would come up with an idea. Let's take an example, picture phone. And they say, this is a great idea. This is what the world wants. And they develop it, and they turn it over to a company called Western Electric, and they build it, and they turn it over to a company called, an operating company called Illinois Bell or Indiana Bell, and they come to you, the consumer, and say, this is what you need. Backwards, right? That's not the way the world works. We have marketing people now that try to start it with the people and work back to the manufacturers. And they created all of the technology. There wasn't anybody else smart enough to do that. Well, it worked pretty well with one application, talking. Now there are thousands of applications, things that Arlene has talked about, things that you guys are all creating. There is no way that any one entity is going to have all the creative ability, the ability to look at many little problems and solve all of those problems, not just the big ones. Just to walk into a Verizon store or an AT&T store, they're trying to create phones. Everybody know what the Google phone looks like? It's got, this is the Android platform phone. It's got everything on it. I mean, it's got a keyboard and a trackball and a touch screen, and every single technology. It would take me a good half hour to talk about it all. And technological marvel. And I just wonder how big the instruction manual is. So I'm getting off the subject, but there is a concept that is starting to penetrate the world. partly because the regulators are demanding it, partly because the carriers are starting to understand they can't do everything, and it is called open access, and there are 3 elements to open access. You've heard about the platforms. Android is one example. There's another platform called LIMO. It stands for Linux Mobile. And there are other platforms that other people can now design applications for phones. So that's one element of it. The second element is you've got to have lots of different devices. And so that these platforms can do different things than talking and listening, and so that the devices can be made to be specialized for different needs of different kinds of people. And the third element is the most difficult and the hardest one. The operators, the carriers, have to let people come in and use their networks, pay for the service, but pay for them in ways that make economic sense. Not, you need a 2-year contract, which is one of the battles that Arlene has fought and won. But little things like, I don't want to buy minutes of time. I'm doing a medical application and I just want to buy a few bits of information, and I'd like to buy it by the bit. That wall is starting to crumble now, and so open access, these 3 elements that I talk about, devices, platforms, and the walled garden is going to be the biggest single thing that's going to make this revolution happen in the future. And the third general thing, I start with technology, open access. The third thing is what we keep calling the handset. I don't know whoever started that, but handsets are for talking and listening. There are 1,000 different devices that I can think of, and I'm not very creative, that can be wirelessly connected and that will be wirelessly connected that are not handsets. And that is one of the crucial elements of what the future of our business is. And I used to give speeches about how the CD is going to be obsoleted. Well, the CD is obsoleted. And there are devices now you can buy that do nothing but bring music down as you ask for it. And these next generation systems are going to do that so cheaply that it'll be crazy for anybody to ever buy a CD. But all the cameras are going to be interconnected. There are going to be all these devices that we've been talking about tonight. It wasn't tonight. It was Paul Jacobs was talking about that at lunch today. We know how to measure everything on the human body. You talked about the doctor. The doctor is going through a checklist. Computers can go through checklists a hell of a lot better than doctors can. So wouldn't you like to have your bodily problems continuously analyzed by a computer that flashes whenever you're about to have a problem, not when you can get an appointment with the doctor? So when all of those things happen, we will have completed a revolution. But I only point out to you that the cellular revolution took some 20 years to happen. So don't be impatient. But there is going to be a revolution.
I have to ask you, Arlene. I wanted Arlene to comment on the same question. What do you see as the future challenge